Hey everyone, this is a quick video just to continue our discussion of global change and our impacts on the world around us. And I want to talk about oceans briefly today. Two topics, ocean warming and ocean acidification. Two things both caused by increased greenhouse gas emission or increased CO2 emissions, I should say, and indirectly linked to climate change. So ocean warming is exactly what it sounds like. It's a phenomenon where the ocean gets warmer over time. And if you look at this graph, you've got years on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, we've got the anomalies of temperature, meaning that, oh, it's unusually warm or unusually cold compared to the baseline. So the baseline is at 0, and you can see that the number of anomaly temperatures in the past few decades has been rising steadily. The ocean is getting warmer. This is caused by increased greenhouse gases. That causes an increase in temperature in the atmosphere, the Earth's surface, and part of the Earth's surface is the ocean. And in fact, 75% of the Earth's surface is the ocean. So that's going to absorb a lot of that infrared radiation and heat up. That can lead to a variety of consequences, habitat loss, forcing species to migrate, messing with their hormonal balances, their ability to develop from baby to adult or to actually reproduce, and any connection to ecological tolerance, right? You can draw a connection between ecological tolerance and an or an organism's ability to thrive and survive in a habitat. They can only live within a certain range of temperature, and if it starts warming too much, they might be now living in a space that is outside their range. So they're either going to struggle, suffer, die, or migrate. And that can also, ocean warming subsequently will have impacts on humans as well. A lot of the food we eat comes from the ocean, so we might see issues with food insecurity. We're going to see more extreme weather events like cyclones, hurricanes, tsunamis, flooding, loss of coastal protection as coastal ecosystems start to die, like mangroves and marshes and wetlands and rocky shores. Those protect us from storms, and as we lose those, we lose storm protection. And as the ocean gets warmer, tends to see change in the range of various species, and with that, the change in diseases as well in terms of where they're distributed around the globe. Ocean warming can also lead to coral bleaching. Coral is something we've talked about before. There's a really great documentary on coral and coral bleaching available on Netflix called Chasing Coral. And coral bleaching, coral is important because, first of all, it's a foundation species, meaning it forms the foundation of its habitat. A coral reef is an ecosystem, but without the coral reef, there's no ecosystem. Much like the trees are the foundation species of a forest. Without trees, there is no forest. And so if you lose the coral, you're going to lose that whole ecosystem. And that ecosystem is a breeding ground for many, many fish that we rely on to eat, but also of various organisms that provide us with chemicals for medication and for genetic resources, amongst many other things, right? That's one reason why corals are important. But there are many, many reasons. So tourism alone is a huge draw for corals. And what's happening with bleaching is that the water gets so warm that the corals, the algae that lives inside the corals starts to die, and the corals lose their color because of that, and then eventually lose their food source. So if you look at a coral, I mentioned this before, corals have a calcium carbonate skeleton, much like our bones. And on the edge of the corals outside are all these hundreds of thousands of little polyps, little tentacle-like things, and inside each tentacle are a bunch of photosynthetic cells. Animals that photosynthesize? Well, not exactly. It's actually a mutualism. There are algae that live inside these cells that provide photosynthetic capabilities. The algae get shelter and a place to live from the corals, and the corals get energy and food from the algae, or the zooxanthellae that are doing photosynthesis. And the issue, you can actually see some of these microalgae inside the polyps tentacles here. Pretty awesome photo. The issue is that these algae are very, very sensitive to temperature. And as the ocean starts to warm, it's outside their range of ecological tolerance, and they start to die off, which leads to coral bleaching. Massive, massive issue for corals. Another issue threatening corals and many other marine species and ecosystems is ocean acidification, which is exactly what it sounds like. The ocean gets more acidic, the pH goes down. This is due to increased carbon dioxide, not all greenhouse gases, just carbon dioxide. and it's actually pretty disconnected from global warming. What carbon dioxide, which comes from cellular respiration, but also a variety of anthropogenic sources like deforestation, burning wood, burning fossil fuels, combustion via your vehicles. That's going to put carbon dioxide into the air. This is the carbon cycle here. And one of the biggest sinks for carbon, as in where does carbon end up, is it ends up in the ocean. There's a lot of carbon in the ocean. But carbon doesn't just stay in the ocean as carbon dioxide. It actually reacts with water to form carbonic acid. And that's going to deplete carbonate. Carbonate is what many organisms use to build their skeletons and their shells. So and when carbon dioxide reacts with the water, it's going to form carbonic acid, which reduces the available carbonate atoms that are floating around in the water. And many organisms use carbonate atoms to build their shells, whether it's a scallop, an oyster, a mussel, a clam, a coral, a lobster, a crab, you name it. Any organism that has a shell probably relies on calcium carbonate to build their shells. But because carbonic acid is reacting with that carbonate ions in the water, there's less carbonate for them to use to build their shells. And that's going to have a number of problems. One, it might dissolve their shells. Two, it might make them harder for them to grow and create new shells. And three, it's going to severely limit the survivability of larvae. So not only is it harder for them to survive, but it's harder for them to grow and thrive. Here's some pictures of a shell that's exposed to acid over the course of 45 days. You can see it's totally losing its structural integrity. And here's a very compelling GIF showing the same thing, a bunch of shells that are placed in a jar of vinegar. Now, granted, vinegar is much, much stronger acid compared to what we're seeing in the ocean, but it's similar effects just over a longer time period. Take a look at this. So submerge the shells in vinegar, immediately you can start to see the calcium dissolving. Now this is happening at a much faster rate because the acid is stronger, but it's that same principle that's happening inside the ocean. So those are two major issues facing the ocean today, ocean warming and ocean acidification, both due to increased carbon emissions. If you've got any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time.